He always worked hard to provide the best for his family, but his wife returned this favor in the worst way possible, cheating on David with his best friend. David Carter stood in front of a dilapidated house, the peeling paint and cracked windows reflecting a life of hardship and struggle. The smell of dampness hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of fresh grass from a nearby park where children laughed and played. In his arms, he cradled his son, Ethan, who was oblivious to the weight of the world that pressed down on his father's shoulders. David gazed at the house, memories flooding back from his childhood, a time when he had vowed to escape the grips of poverty that had ensnared his family. "Dad, can we go play?" Ethan's small voice broke through David's reverie, his blue eyes sparkling with innocence and hope. David looked down at his son, the embodiment of his dreams and aspirations, and felt a pang of guilt. He had promised himself that he would never let his family feel the same struggles he had endured growing up. Yet here he was, grappling with the reality of a life that seemed to be an endless cycle of toil and sacrifice. "Just a minute, buddy," David replied, forcing a smile. He gently set Ethan down, brushing a tuft of hair from his forehead. "I just need to think about some things first." Ethan nodded, his enthusiasm undeterred. He darted towards the park, laughter trailing behind him as he joined a group of other children. David watched him for a moment, his heart swelling with pride. This was why he worked so hard, to provide a better life for Ethan and his wife, Emily. But as he stood there, watching the fleeting joy of childhood, the weight of his own sacrifices bore down heavily on him. With a deep breath, David turned away from the house, its worn facade a reminder of everything he wanted to change. He had grown up in a place not much different from this, where dreams felt out of reach and hope often flickered like a dying flame. His parents had done their best, but the struggle had been constant, and he had sworn to himself that his family would never have to endure the same fate. As he walked towards the bus stop to head to work, he remembered the moment he had decided to chase success with relentless determination. It had been just after he graduated high school, standing in the kitchen with his mother, who had tears in her eyes as she spoke about the sacrifices they had made. "David, you have to promise me that you'll do better than us. You have to chase your dreams, whatever they may be." "Mom, I will," he had vowed, the sincerity in his voice echoing in his heart. And now, years later, he was on the brink of a promotion that could change everything. He had worked late nights and weekends, pouring every ounce of energy into his job at the local manufacturing plant. At the plant, the atmosphere buzzed with the sounds of machinery and the chatter of coworkers. David entered the building, greeted by the familiar sights and smells that had become his second home. He made his way to his workstation, a small desk cluttered with blueprints and reports, ready to tackle another day of challenges. His boss, Mr. Thompson, had been watching him closely, impressed by his dedication and the results he consistently delivered. "Carter," Mr. Thompson called out, his voice booming across the room. David straightened up, feeling a surge of pride at being noticed. "Get in here. I want to talk to you." David's heart raced as he followed his boss into the office. He had prepared himself for this moment, rehearsing what he would say if the opportunity ever arose. Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been watching your progress, David. You've been putting in some serious work, and it hasn't gone unnoticed," he said, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. David felt a rush of adrenaline. This was the validation he had been striving for. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that," David replied, trying to maintain his composure. Mr. Thompson leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I'm pleased to inform you that we're promoting you to supervisor. With that comes a significant salary increase. You've earned it." David's heart soared. "Really? Thank you. I won't let you down," he exclaimed, unable to contain his excitement. The promotion was everything he had worked for, a step towards securing a better future for his family. He could already envision the possibilities: the new house, a reliable car, maybe even a family vacation. As he left the office, David felt buoyant, the weight of his sacrifices momentarily lifted. He looked around at his coworkers who were busy with their tasks and felt a wave of gratitude for the journey that had led him to this moment. He could already imagine the pride in Emily's eyes when he shared the news with her. Later that evening, David arrived home to find Emily in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. The aroma of sautéed onions filled the air, mingling with the scent of fresh bread. She glanced up as he entered, her smile warm and welcoming. "Hey you, how was your day?" "Emily, you won't believe what happened," he exclaimed, unable to contain his excitement. "I got promoted. I'm going to be the new supervisor." Her face lit up with genuine happiness, and she rushed to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "That's amazing, David. I knew you could do it." They embraced tightly, and for a moment the weight of the world faded away. David felt the warmth of her body against his, the familiar comfort that had once been a constant in their lives. Yet, as he pulled back to look into her eyes, he sensed a flicker of something else, a shadow that seemed to pass over her expression. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing her momentary hesitation. "Of course," she replied quickly, forcing a smile. "I'm just so proud of you. This is what we've been working towards, right?" "Exactly," David said, feeling the thrill of success radiating through him. As they talked about the future, he felt a surge of hope, believing that this promotion would finally bring them the stability and happiness they had always desired. But as he watched Emily move about the kitchen, her movements graceful yet slightly distant, David felt a nagging worry. He had been so focused on his work, on climbing the corporate ladder, that he had failed to notice the subtle changes in her demeanor. Later that night, as they settled down for bed, David turned to Emily, ready to share his dreams of the future, but he noticed the way she stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. Are you sure everything is okay?" She turned to him, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and something else, an unspoken longing that David couldn't quite place. "I'm fine, David. I'm just thinking about everything, you know?" He nodded, sensing the distance between them, yet he brushed it off, convincing himself that the excitement of the promotion would bridge the gap. "We're going to be okay, Emily, I promise. We'll finally get out of this place and build the life we always wanted." As he closed his eyes, David felt a flicker of doubt. He had sacrificed so much for this moment, but as he drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their story, an undercurrent of tension that loomed beneath the surface, waiting to be unveiled. David Carter sat at his cluttered desk, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as he stared at the stack of papers before him. It was late, much later than he had planned to stay at the office. He had promised Emily he would be home for dinner, yet here he was, lost in a sea of spreadsheets and reports. The promotion that had once filled him with pride now felt like a noose tightening around his neck. He took a deep breath, rubbing his temples to ease the growing tension. "Just a few more minutes," he murmured to himself, his voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. He knew he was pushing his luck, but the thought of financial stability for his family kept him anchored to his chair. The sacrifices he made were for them, Emily and little Ethan. But as he glanced at the clock, its hands mocking him, he felt a pang of guilt twist in his stomach. Meanwhile, at home, Emily stood in the kitchen, the scent of simmering pasta wafting through the air. She stirred the sauce absent-mindedly, her mind elsewhere. It had become a familiar routine. Cooking dinner alone, waiting for David to come home, and feeling the weight of her loneliness press down on her with each passing minute. She tried to push those feelings aside, reminding herself that David was working hard for their future, yet the silence in the house was deafening. "Why can't he just call?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely breaking the stillness. She poured the sauce over the pasta, her heart sinking as she set the table for one. A small part of her wanted to believe that David would walk in the door any moment, his face lighting up when he saw her, but another part knew that tonight would be just like all the others. When David finally arrived home, the house was dark, save for the faint glow of the kitchen light. He stepped inside, his shoes squeaking on the tiled floor, and caught the aroma of the meal Emily had prepared. It was a small comfort, a reminder of the life they had built together, but as he called her name, "Emily?" his voice echoed back in a way that felt hollow. She emerged from the kitchen, her smile forced. "You made it," she said, attempting to infuse enthusiasm into her tone. "Dinner is ready. I thought we could have a little family night." David's face fell slightly as he glanced at the clock on the wall. "I'm sorry, Em, there's so much to do at work. I thought I could finish up, and then we could spend some time together. I'll make it up to you, I promise." Emily's heart sank further. "You always say that." Her voice trembled with unspoken hurt. "I just want to feel like I matter to you, David. I'm doing this for us." He shot back, frustration creeping into his tone. "I'm trying to secure our future. Don't you see that?" "I do see it," she replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But what good is a secure future if you're not even here to share it with us?" David opened his mouth to respond, but the words fell flat. He felt the weight of her disappointment, but he was too entrenched in his own ambitions to fully grasp her pain. Instead, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll be done soon. Just give me a few more weeks and then things will settle down, okay? Emily nodded, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Okay, she said softly, her heart heavy with the reality that was beginning to seep into their lives. His sacrifices were becoming a chasm between them. As the days passed, the gap only widened. David continued to bury himself in work, believing fervently that he was doing the right thing. He was driven by the desire to provide a better life for his family, yet he failed to see how his absence was slowly eroding the foundation of their marriage. One evening, while attending a company event, Emily found herself standing near the refreshments table, feeling out of place among the chattering colleagues. Everyone seemed to be caught up in their own worlds, laughing and mingling. She sipped her drink, glancing around when her gaze landed on Ryan, a charming co-worker of David's. "Emily, you look lovely tonight." Ryan approached her with an easy smile, his eyes warm and inviting. "Thank you, Ryan. It's nice to be out for a change," she replied, trying to sound cheerful. "David is lucky to have you," he said, leaning against the table casually. "He talks about you all the time. It's clear how much he cares about you and Ethan." Emily felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "He does work hard for us," she acknowledged, but there was a hint of sadness in her voice. Ryan caught the undertone and leaned in slightly. "You know, it's okay to want more than just financial security. You deserve to feel valued and appreciated, too." His words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Emily felt seen. "I appreciate that, Ryan. Sometimes it feels like I'm just here, waiting for him to notice me." Ryan's expression softened. "You're more than that. You're an amazing person, Emily. Don't forget it." Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and Emily found herself laughing and sharing stories. In that moment, she felt a spark of connection, a sense of belonging that had been missing for so long. As the night wore on, she realized that this fleeting interaction had ignited a warmth within her that she hadn't felt in years. Back at home, the following days felt like a blur. David continued to work late, oblivious to the emotional turmoil brewing within Emily. He thought he was doing everything right, pouring his heart into his job, while Emily tried to fill the void with small moments of connection with Ryan. Soon, David decided to surprise Emily. He had saved for months and finally managed to replace their outdated kitchen appliances with beautiful new ones. He envisioned her reaction, how her eyes would light up with joy, and he couldn't wait to see her smile. "Emily," he called, excitement bubbling in his chest as he opened the front door. "I'm home." He stepped into the kitchen where the new appliances gleamed under the warm light. "Surprise?" he exclaimed, gesturing grandly. "Look what I got for you." Emily stood frozen, her heart racing as she took in the sight. It was beautiful, a testament to David's hard work, but it felt like a hollow gift. She forced a smile, but inside she was torn. "Wow, David, this is amazing," she said, her voice shaky. "Isn't it?" He beamed, stepping closer. "I wanted to do something special for you. You deserve it." "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's really beautiful." Yet, even as she said the words, she felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The kitchen, once a space filled with laughter and togetherness, felt like a reminder of everything that was slipping away. She could see the pride in David's eyes, but the warmth she craved was missing. "Let's celebrate," David suggested, oblivious to the storm brewing in Emily's heart. "How about a nice dinner out, just the two of us?" Emily's heart twisted. "I don't know, David. I'm not really feeling up to it." "Come on, it'll be fun." He took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We need to celebrate our success together." She forced a smile, nodding, but inside she felt like she was drowning. All the sacrifices, the late nights, the empty promises, it was all supposed to lead to happiness, yet here she was, feeling more alone than ever. As they stood in the new kitchen, David's excitement bubbling over, Emily felt the weight of her unspoken feelings pressing down on her. She wanted to tell him how lost she felt, how his absence had created a void too vast to fill with material things, but the words stuck in her throat, suffocated by the fear of shattering the fragile facade of their life. "Let's just enjoy this moment," she thought, forcing herself to focus on the gleaming appliances, the beautiful gift he had given her. But even as she tried to embrace the joy, the ache in her heart lingered, a constant reminder that sometimes sacrifices led to unforeseen consequences, and happiness was not always found in success. David Carter had forged a path through life with relentless dedication, believing each late night at the office and every missed family dinner was a step closer to a brighter future for his wife Emily and their son Ethan. Days melted into weeks and weeks into months, with David pouring himself into his work, convinced that success equated to happiness. The promotion he had achieved brought a raise and a sense of accomplishment, yet it also distanced him from the very family he sought to uplift. After weeks of late nights and missed milestones, David found himself in the harsh light of an empty dinner table. The smell of his favorite meal, chicken Alfredo, lingered in the air, but the seat across from him remained conspicuously vacant. Emily had been distant lately, her laughter replaced by silence, and the warmth they once shared had grown cold. He picked up his fork, poking at the pasta, feeling a pang of guilt wash over him. "I'm doing this for us," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince himself or the shadows of the room. As the days turned into an indistinguishable blur, David found solace in the routine of work. Meetings, reports, and conference calls became his lifeline, but he remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil brewing within Emily. She had begun to confide in her coworker Ryan, whose charm and attention filled the void David had inadvertently created. Their conversations, initially innocent, had morphed into something more, a connection that ignited a spark she thought long extinguished. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the large office windows, Emily and Ryan shared a quiet moment in the break room, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. "You look tired," Ryan said, leaning against the counter, his tone laced with genuine concern. "Are you doing okay?" Emily forced a smile, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just a lot on my plate, I guess. David's been working late, and I'm trying to manage everything at home." Ryan stepped closer, his presence both comforting and electrifying. "You shouldn't have to do everything alone. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." His gaze held hers, and in that moment, the weight of her loneliness felt a little lighter. "Thanks, Ryan," she replied, her heart racing as she felt the warmth of his proximity. "It's just, sometimes it feels like I'm invisible." "You're not invisible," he murmured, brushing his fingertips against her arm in an innocent gesture that sent a thrill down her spine. "You deserve to be valued, Emily." The tension between them crackled like static electricity, and as their eyes locked, Emily could feel the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. They shared a lingering conversation filled with laughter and understanding, stealing glances that lingered just a moment too long. Meanwhile, David remained oblivious to the shift occurring in his home. He was too preoccupied with his relentless drive for success, convinced that every hour spent at the office was a testament to his love for Emily and Ethan. He envisioned a future where they would live without financial strain, where worries about bills and expenses would be relics of the past. And yet, with each passing day, his family seemed to slip further from his grasp. Finally, one day, David decided he would take a rare day off to reconnect with his family. He envisioned a picnic at the park, a chance to remind Emily of the love they once shared. He pictured Ethan's laughter ringing through the air as they tossed a frisbee back and forth. With renewed hope, he prepared for the day, his heart swelling with anticipation. However, when he arrived home, he was met with Emily's cold demeanor. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes glued to her phone, a frown etched on her face. The warmth he had imagined was replaced by an uncomfortable chill. "Hey, honey," he began, trying to mask his confusion. "I thought we could spend the day together. I've got a picnic ready." Emily looked up, her expression unreadable. "Oh, I didn't know you were taking the day off," she said, her voice lacking enthusiasm. David's heart sank. "I thought it would be nice for us to reconnect, just us and Ethan." "Right," she replied, her gaze drifting back to her phone. "That sounds nice." He could see the distance in her eyes, a barrier he could not penetrate. "Emily, what's wrong?" he pressed gently. "You seem distant." She hesitated, her fingers tapping nervously against the screen. "It's nothing, I'm just tired. Work has been overwhelming." David frowned, concern etching lines across his forehead. "I know I've been working a lot, but I want to be here for you. I want us to be a family again." Her silence hung heavy in the air, and David felt the weight of her unspoken words pressing down on him. "Can we just talk, please?" Emily exhaled slowly, her defenses crumbling momentarily. I don't know if I can do this right now. I need time." A knot twisted in David's stomach as he processed her words. Time for what? He asked, desperation creeping into his voice. I thought we were in this together. She turned away, her voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I feel like I'm not even here anymore. His heart raced, a deep foreboding settling over him. What do you mean? Emily, talk to me. I feel alone, David, she confessed, her voice trembling. You're always working and I'm left here. I'm doing this for us, he interrupted, his frustration spilling over. Everything I do is for this family, for our future. Is it really? She shot back, her eyes flashing with hurt. Because it feels like you're building a life without me in it. David stepped back, the realization hitting him like a cold wave. I thought you understood why I worked so hard. I thought it was what we wanted. Emily shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. I wanted you, David. I wanted you to be here, not just physically but emotionally. I wanted to feel like I mattered. The silence that followed was deafening. David's heart raced as he grasped the enormity of her words. He had been so focused on providing, on achieving, that he had neglected the very foundation of their relationship. Emily, please, he pleaded, his voice softening. I'm here now. Let's make this work. I can cut back on my hours, I promise. But she stood up abruptly, pulling away from him. It's not that simple. I don't know if I can just turn off these feelings I've developed. David's breath hitched. What feelings? Her silence screamed louder than any confession, and in that moment he realized that the chasm between them had grown deeper than he ever anticipated. Emily, he whispered, stepping forward, desperate to bridge the gap, but she shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. I need space, David. As she walked away, David felt the full weight of his sacrifices crashing down on him. The life he had fought so hard to build was slipping through his fingers, and he was left standing in the wreckage, the echoes of his own ambition haunting him. David Carter paced the living room, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound accompanying his thoughts, which swirled like a storm inside his mind. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. Earlier that evening, he had caught sight of Emily's phone buzzing incessantly on the kitchen counter, its screen illuminating the darkened room with a message from a contact he didn't recognize. The name was short and unassuming, Ryan. His heart raced as he approached the phone, each step feeling heavier than the last. A mix of anger and confusion coursed through him. He felt his hands tremble slightly as he picked it up, the glass cool against his palm. David's instincts screamed at him to look, to pry into the world that Emily had seemingly hidden from him, but a part of him resisted, a flicker of trust still lingering despite the gnawing doubts. Maybe it's just work, he muttered to himself, trying to rationalize the situation. She's been busy, they've been working late on that project. He placed the phone back down, but the buzzing continued, relentless and mocking. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising tide of anxiety. I need to trust her, he said aloud, though the words felt hollow. The truth was, he had been so wrapped up in his own ambition, in the relentless pursuit of success, that he had neglected the emotional landscape of his marriage. The thought twisted painfully in his gut. A moment later, Emily entered the room, her face lighting up with a smile that momentarily disarmed him. Hey, honey. You're home early, she said, her tone cheerful, but there was an edge of nervousness in her voice that he couldn't quite place. Yeah, I thought I'd surprise you. How was your day? David asked, forcing a smile, though his heart felt heavy with unspoken questions. Oh, you know, the usual, busy at work, Emily replied, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture he had come to recognize as a sign of her unease. She moved towards the kitchen, her back turned to him. Did you get any messages? He asked, trying to keep his tone casual even as he felt the weight of the question hang between them. Just some updates from work, she said quickly, her voice slightly higher than usual. Nothing important. David nodded, but the tension in the air was palpable. He wanted to press further, to demand answers, but he hesitated, the remnants of trust still holding him back. Well, I was thinking we could do something special this weekend, just the two of us, he suggested, trying to sound upbeat. Emily turned to face him, her expression unreadable. That sounds nice, she said softly, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Was it guilt, or perhaps fear? He couldn't tell, but it made his heart sink. As the evening wore on, David tried to shake off the unease, engaging in small talk as they prepared dinner together. They chopped vegetables side by side, the rhythm of their movements a familiar dance, yet the silence between them felt heavier than ever. "I saw the new restaurant open downtown. We should check it out," David said, attempting to steer the conversation towards lighter topics. "Yeah, that would be nice," Emily replied, her gaze fixed on the cutting board. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern seeping into his voice. "You seem a bit distracted." "I'm fine," she said too quickly, her eyes darting away from him. David frowned, sensing the wall between them growing thicker. The following days passed in a blur of work and strained conversations. David threw himself into his job, focusing on deadlines and reports, while Emily appeared to retreat into herself, her laughter becoming less frequent, her smiles more forced. In the quiet moments of the night, when David lay awake staring at the ceiling, he could feel the distance between them widening like a chasm. One evening, while preparing for bed, David noticed a small, folded piece of paper peeking out from under Emily's pillow. His heart raced again, and he felt a sense of dread wash over him as he picked it up. It was a note hastily written, filled with words that cut through him like glass. "I can't keep doing this," it began, and his breath caught in his throat. "I thought things would get better, but they're only getting worse. I need more than just your ambition." David's hands trembled as he read the words, each line igniting a fresh wave of pain. The note continued, detailing feelings of loneliness and longing, a desperate plea for connection that he realized he hadn't provided. The signature at the bottom was a simple E, but the implications were staggering. He stood frozen in the dim light, the note clutched tightly in his hand, feeling the weight of the truth crash down upon him. Emily had lost herself in the shadows of his ambition, and he had been too blind to see it. In the following days, Emily's guilt began to manifest in small ways, her inability to meet his gaze, the way her laughter felt forced, the nights she would come home later than usual, her excuses growing thin. Each interaction was tinged with a tension he could no longer ignore. David's heart sank deeper with every fleeting moment of intimacy they shared as he felt her slip further away. Meanwhile, Emily wrestled with her conscience, torn between the thrill of her secret and the love she still held for David. The affair had started innocently enough, with Ryan's easy charm and understanding demeanor filling the gaps that David's ambition had created. But now, every moment with him felt like a betrayal, a hollow victory that left her feeling more isolated than ever. One afternoon, as she sat in her car during her lunch break, Emily glanced at her phone, the screen lighting up with a message from Ryan. "Can we talk? I miss you." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She knew she should respond, should reassure him that everything was fine. But the truth was, nothing felt fine anymore. "Why did I let it get this far?" she whispered to herself. Tears brimming in her eyes, she thought of David, the sacrifices he had made, the long hours he worked to provide for their family, and yet here she was, seeking comfort in the arms of another man. The guilt washed over her like a tidal wave, relentless and overwhelming. "Emily?" Ryan's voice jolted her back to reality as he approached her car, concern etched on his face. I can't," she stammered, shaking her head as she wiped away her tears. Hey, he said gently, leaning closer. "What's going on?" "I just need some time," she replied, her voice trembling. "This is all too much." Ryan nodded, his brow furrowing. "I get it. Just know that I'm here for you, okay? Whenever you're ready to talk." As he walked away, Emily felt a mix of relief and despair. She knew she had to make a choice, but the fear of confronting David loomed large in her mind. The notion of honesty felt like stepping into a void, one that she wasn't sure she could survive. Meanwhile, David remained oblivious to the turmoil brewing just beneath the surface. He meticulously planned a surprise romantic getaway, convinced that a weekend alone would rekindle the intimacy they had lost. With each passing day, he felt the longing to connect with Emily grow stronger, a flickering hope in the darkness that seemed to envelop their relationship. "I'll make this perfect," he murmured to himself as he packed their bags. He envisioned the two of them laughing, sharing stories, and finally reconnecting in a way that had felt so distant. As he finished packing, David's heart swelled with anticipation. He hoped that this trip would bridge the gap between them, that it would remind Emily of the love they once shared. Little did he know the storm of emotions was building and the revelation of secrets was just around the corner. With a final glance around the room, he turned off the lights, ready to embrace the weekend ahead. Unbeknownst to him, the shadows that loomed over their marriage had only deepened, and as they prepared to leave, the weight of sacrifice hung heavy in the air, waiting for the moment when it would all come crashing down. David and Emily Carter pulled into the picturesque cabin, nestled among towering pines, their getaway finally realized after weeks of David's relentless work schedule. He had envisioned this trip as a chance to reconnect, to break free from the grind of their daily lives. But as they unloaded the car, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. Emily was unusually quiet, her gaze often drifting to the horizon rather than meeting his eyes. "Here, let me help you with that," David said, reaching for the suitcase she was struggling to lift. His voice was warm, laced with the hope that this weekend would rekindle the spark they once had. But as he grabbed the handle, Emily pulled away slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. "I've got it," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. David frowned, sensing the distance between them was more than just physical. They entered the cabin, and he tried to shake off the unease. The interior was cozy, adorned with rustic furniture and a fireplace that promised warmth. He placed the suitcase down and turned to Emily, who was already examining her phone, scrolling through messages. "Let's go for a walk by the lake," he suggested, trying to inject some enthusiasm into the moment. "I remember you used to love that." "Sure," Emily replied, her voice flat. She slipped her phone into her pocket, but David noticed her fingers lingered over it, almost as if she was reluctant to part with it. As they walked, David attempted to engage her in conversation, reminiscing about their early days together, the laughter-filled hikes, and the dreams they had for their future. He watched as Emily's eyes remained distant, her replies vague. "Remember our first anniversary, we hiked up to that beautiful overlook?" he asked, chuckling softly at the memory. "It took us hours to get there, but the view was worth it." "Yeah, it was," Emily said, her tone lacking any enthusiasm. She looked away, focusing on the rippling water instead of David's face. David felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "Is everything okay?" he ventured, his heart racing at the thought of her unhappiness. "You seem distracted." "Just tired, I guess," she replied quickly, dismissing his concern. "It's been a long week." David nodded, but the unease lingered. They returned to the cabin, and he started to prepare dinner, trying to create a warm atmosphere. He chopped vegetables and seasoned the chicken, all the while casting glances at Emily, who sat on the couch, her attention absorbed by her phone again. "Emily, can you help me set the table?" he called out, hoping to draw her into the moment. "Yeah, just a sec," she replied, still not looking up. As the aroma of the meal filled the cabin, David felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could turn this weekend around. He plated their dinner and brought it to the table, the flickering candlelight casting a soft glow around them. "Dinner's ready," he announced cheerfully, but Emily didn't move. "Just a minute," she said again, her eyes glued to the screen. David's heart sank. He took a deep breath, trying to suppress the frustration rising within him. "Emily, please. Can we just put our phones down for one night? I really want to talk to you." She finally looked up, and for a brief moment he saw a flash of guilt in her eyes. "I'm sorry, David. I have some things on my mind." "What kind of things?" he pressed gently, sitting down across from her. She hesitated, her fingers nervously tapping against the table. "It's nothing, just work stuff." "Emily, it can't just be that. You've been distant for a while now," David urged, feeling a swell of emotions thrumming beneath the surface. "Can we just eat?" she snapped, and the bite in her voice startled him. David's heart dropped. "Okay," he said softly, feeling defeated. They began to eat in silence, the clinking of silverware echoing against the walls, amplifying the distance growing between them. Later that night, as David lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The woman he loved, the woman he had dedicated his life to providing for, was slipping away from him, and he felt powerless to stop it. He turned to Emily, who lay with her back to him, seemingly lost in her own world. "Emily," he whispered, hoping to bridge the gap. "Yeah?" she replied, her voice barely above a murmur. "Can we talk?" "I'm really tired, David," she said, her tone now softer but still distant. "Please," he pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. I just want to understand." Emily sighed, turning to face him. "What do you want to understand? That I feel alone? That I don't know how to talk to you anymore?" David's heart raced. "I can't fix it if I don't know what's wrong," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. She looked away, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're so focused on work, on providing, that you don't see what's right in front of you. I feel like I'm losing you, David." "I'm right here," he exclaimed, frustration bubbling over. "I'm doing this for us, for our family." "But at what cost?" she challenged, her voice rising. "You're here, but you're not really here. You don't see me anymore." David fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. He wanted to argue, to defend his choices, but deep down he knew she was right. The following day, they packed up and headed home, the tension still thick in the air. David felt like they had achieved nothing, and each mile felt heavier than the last. As they arrived home, David unloaded the car, his mind racing. He caught sight of Emily's purse on the counter and instinctively reached for it, a nagging curiosity gnawing at him. He hesitated, knowing he shouldn't invade her privacy, but the weight of the weekend settled heavily on his shoulders. He unzipped the purse, searching for anything that might explain the distance he felt. As he rummaged through her belongings, his fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. With a quick glance over his shoulder, he pulled it out and unfolded it. His heart dropped as he read the words, each line cutting deeper than the last. It was a note filled with Emily's raw emotions, her feelings of abandonment, loneliness, and the ache of unfulfilled love. David's hands trembled as he finished reading, the truth crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He felt sick to his stomach, the realization settling in that he had pushed her away. "Emily," he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. She appeared in the doorway, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she saw the note in his hand. "What are you doing?" "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you say any of this to me?" "David, please," she started, a panic rising in her voice. "Please what? Deny it? Pretend everything is fine?" He interrupted, pain and anger mixing in his chest. "I didn't want to hurt you," she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But you're hurting me now," David shouted, the weight of betrayal heavy in the air. "You've been hiding this from me, and I had no idea." "I didn't want to hurt you," she repeated, her voice breaking. "I thought it would get better. I thought if I just kept things together, you would notice me again." David felt a profound sadness wash over him, his anger dissipating as he saw the hurt in her eyes. "What do we do now?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Emily stepped closer, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. David's heart ached as he watched the woman he loved begin to crumble before him. He wanted nothing more than to fix everything, to turn back time and make different choices. But the weight of reality pressed down on him, and he felt the fabric of their lives unraveling. In that moment, he understood that no amount of success could fill the void that had grown between them. As he stood there, the note crumpled in his hands, David knew that the sacrifices he had made to build a better life had come at an unimaginable cost. The love of his life was slipping away, and he didn't know how to save her. David Carter sat in his cubicle, staring blankly at the glowing screen in front of him. The rhythmic tapping of keyboards and the distant hum of conversations filled the air, but he was lost in his thoughts. Just moments ago, he had received a call that turned his world upside down. The police had reached out to him, their words heavy with urgency. "Your wife, Emily, has been in an accident." The rest of the message was a blur as panic took hold of him. He could barely process the details, but the one thing that reverberated in his mind was the chilling realization that she had been with Ryan. He slammed his hands against the desk, briefly drawing the attention of his co-workers. They exchanged concerned glances, but David hardly noticed. His heart raced as he fought to collect himself. He grabbed his jacket and rushed out of the office, ignoring the questions and worried looks that followed him. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. Emily needed him. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. The streets blurred as he navigated through traffic, each red light a jarring reminder of how fragile life could be. David clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension. What if something happened to her? What if he never got the chance to tell her how much he loved her? Thoughts of their life together flooded his mind, Ethan's laughter, the way Emily's eyes sparkled when she smiled, the dreams they had built together. All of it felt like it was slipping away. When he finally arrived at the hospital, he dashed through the sliding doors, his breath coming in frantic gasps. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled his nostrils as he approached the reception desk. "I'm looking for Emily Carter," he said, his voice trembling. The receptionist looked up, her expression a mixture of sympathy and professionalism. "Room 204, family waiting area," she replied, gesturing down the hallway. David sprinted toward the room, his heart pounding in his chest. As he entered the waiting area, he was met by the sight of Emily's parents, their faces etched with worry. They stood huddled together, exchanging hushed whispers that ceased abruptly when David walked in. David," Emily's mother, Linda, said softly, her voice breaking. "They're still assessing her injuries. We don't know much yet." David nodded, his throat dry. He felt as though he were in a nightmare, the kind where you're aware of everything around you but powerless to change anything. "What happened?" he asked, forcing the words out as he tried to maintain his composure. "She was hit by a car," Linda said, tears brimming in her eyes. "The police said she was distracted." The word struck David like a blow. Distracted. His mind raced back to the countless nights he had spent working late, the times he had brushed off Emily's concerns, believing that providing for his family would heal their rift. But now, standing here, he realized the truth he had been avoiding. His ambition had pushed her away. "Is she going to be okay?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "We don't know," her father, Harold, replied, his brow furrowed with worry. "They're doing everything they can." David's heart sank further as the minutes dragged on, each ticking second amplifying his anxiety. He wanted to scream, to shake the universe for allowing this to happen. How could he have let things get this far? Finally, a doctor emerged from the hallway, his expression serious yet compassionate. "Mr. Carter?" he called, and David's heart leapt into his throat. "We've stabilized your wife, but she has sustained severe injuries. She's in critical condition and will need immediate surgery." David felt the ground shift beneath him. "Can I see her?" he asked, urgency lacing his words. The doctor hesitated. "She's currently unconscious, but you can speak to her if you'd like. It might help her." Without waiting for another word, David followed the doctor down the sterile corridor. His mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions, anger, fear, regret. As they entered the room, David's heart shattered at the sight of Emily. She lay unconscious on the hospital bed, bandages wrapped around her head, her face pale and fragile. Monitors beeped rhythmically, the sounds contrasting sharply with the stillness that enveloped the room. David stepped closer, his heart aching. "Emily," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here. Please wake up." He took her hand in his, feeling how cold it was. "I need you to come back to me. I can't do this without you." Moments stretched into what felt like hours, but then, miraculously, Emily's eyes fluttered open. Pain clouded her gaze, but as her eyes landed on David, a flicker of recognition sparked within them. "David?" she croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Shh, don't try to talk," he urged gently, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "You're safe now. I'm right here." Tears welled in her eyes as she struggled to focus. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for this to happen." David's heart sank at her words. "Emily, we'll talk about everything later. Just focus on getting better," he said, trying to keep his voice steady even as his world felt like it was crumbling. "No," she insisted, her voice growing stronger despite her weakness. "You deserve to know. I was with Ryan. She hesitated, the weight of her confession hanging in the air like an unbearable burden. "I didn't feel like I mattered anymore. I didn't know how to tell you." David's breath caught in his throat. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in his chest, but he couldn't let anger consume him in this moment. "Emily, he began, but she interrupted him. "Please let me finish," she urged, tears streaming down her face. I thought I could find happiness again, but I was wrong. I just wanted you to see me, to notice me." David's heart ached for her, for the pain that had driven her into Ryan's arms. "I didn't realize how much I was pushing you away," he admitted, his voice choked with emotion. "I thought if I worked harder, everything would be okay. I thought I was doing it for us." Emily's eyes filled with regret. "But I needed you, David. I needed you to be present. Not just physically, but emotionally. I felt so alone." The truth hung between them, heavy and undeniable. David felt rage bubbling beneath the surface, but he couldn't let it take hold. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm so sorry for neglecting you, for making you feel that way." Emily's breathing became shallow as the pain intensified. "David, I don't know if I can ever make this right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I love you, but I made a terrible mistake." As David looked into her eyes, he felt the weight of their shared history, the love, the laughter, the dreams that now felt so fragile. "We can work through this," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "I want to try, but you need to fight for us, too." Suddenly, alarms began to blare and a flurry of medical personnel rushed into the room. "We need to stabilize her," one of the nurses shouted as they surrounded the bed, pushing David back. He felt a panic rise within him as he was forced to step aside, helplessly watching as they worked to save the woman he loved. "Emily," he called out, desperation clawing at his throat. But as they moved in a flurry of urgency, her eyes closed again, drifting into unconsciousness. Hours passed like an eternity as David paced the waiting area, his heart racing with fear and uncertainty. He replayed their conversation over and over in his mind, the weight of her betrayal sitting heavily on his chest. He had sacrificed so much for his family, and yet here he was, feeling utterly powerless. Finally, a doctor approached him, exhaustion etched on his face. "Mr. Carter," he said, and David's heart sank again. "We did everything we could, but she didn't make it." The world around him collapsed. David felt as though he were falling into an abyss, the ground disappearing beneath his feet. "No, no, no," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're wrong. She was just here. She can't be gone." "I'm so sorry," the doctor said, his voice somber. David staggered back, his body numb with shock. He couldn't breathe, couldn't comprehend the enormity of what had just happened. Emily, the love of his life, was gone. All the sacrifices he had made, all the hours he had poured into work, what had it all amounted to? He had fought so hard to build a future for them, but in the end, he lost everything. As he stood there, tears streaming down his face, he realized the harsh truth. He had lost the very family he fought to save. The weight of his sacrifices had become a burden too heavy to bear, and all that remained were the shattered dreams of a life that could have been.